I'm very happy to pass the floor to Steinar Bryn from the Nansen Center for Peace and Dialogue. Please, Steinar, you have the floor.
Thank you. It's very nice to be here, and I see quite a few people that I met a couple of weeks ago in Berlin, where we talked about shared society. And I feel that's kind of what we're talking about here as well. How do we develop shared societies? It's kind of amazing that we've been around for so long and still are struggling with cracking this code. How can we make the world we live in more humane? I come from the Nansen Center, yes. Fridtjof Nansen was the first High Commissioner for Refugees within the League of Nations. In 1922, he received the Nobel Peace Prize. After World War I, hundreds of thousands of refugees were without travel documents. And he responded to this. And he is mostly recognized for the Nansen passport. People were ridiculing him. They said, come on, states issue passports, not individuals. And he said, give me a chance. And 52 states recognized the Nansen passport. And it became the first legal instrument for international protection of refugees. Over the last couple of years, I wondered, what if some of the refugees crossing the Mediterranean had the Nansen passport? Maybe they could have taken the ferry and paid $20. One legacy from Nansen is the quote, "Nothing is impossible. The impossible only takes a little longer." And we have reformulated this to TTT. Things take time. The main reason I'm here is the dialogue work I've been doing between majority, minority, the last 20 years. This has mainly been interethnic dialogue in the Western Balkans. And what I have learned, the essence of what I have learned, is the necessity of integrated education to counter the one-sided propaganda that is still infecting children in segregated schools. The advisory committee started with a strong focus on advocacy policy, legislation, minority rights, how to secure representative participation in authoritative bodies. All of this is good and necessary, but as even the chair of our panel pointed out, only integrated and inclusive societies where diversity is embedded, valued and lived can ensure the effective protection of minority rights. In other words, it's not only a question of rights. We have to be able to exercise, to live, and often in a hostile environment. So how can people live out, exercise these rights? That's where social dialogue, reconciliation comes in as a necessary component. Multiculturalism has not failed in Europe. It has not been properly tried. What has failed is parallel cultures. And we can call it cultural parallelism. Coexisting is not enough. We need to communicate and cooperate. We need to see and understand each other better. And the role of integration is, integrated education is crucial in that process. We can take the civil rights in the United States as an example. If it only was a question of rights, they would have won it 50 years ago. I Have a Dream is still beautiful. 50 years later, Julian Bond said at the anniversary on the Washington Mall, white people still live over there, black people still live over there, and when they don't meet, when they don't communicate, they don't understand each other. In a very provocative book, Jonathan Haidt discusses why are good people divided by religion and politics. His bottom line is that people are not divided by war, discrimination. They are divided because that's how we, the people, organize our worlds. We divide the world in us and them. Whether we grow up in a working class environment in Strasbourg, Indian village, whether we grow up as a fisherman in Norway or a farmer in Poland, that's what we do. This division in itself is not so dangerous. What is problematic? It's combined with an other human characteristic. We are fundamentally self-righteous. Why the civil rights didn't succeed in the United States is they only dealt with the legal framework. They didn't deal with maybe the real problem. White supremacy, the feeling of superiority. And when the division is between a majority and a minority, the majority doesn't claim the right to decide only because they are the biggest number. They're also convinced they are right, and the minority is wrong. Which is why the condition of self-righteousness is dangerous when combined with a democratic majority. Because in this situation, it becomes more attractive to start to dream of being part of the majority in another country than to be minority in a place where you're not listened to, respected, and understood. This also goes for Norway. The father of my granddaughter, he just did a research, doctoral research. He sent 900 applications with a Norwegian name, and then he only changed the name to a foreign name. 900 identical applications. Guess who were called for the job interview? He calls them up, explains this was research, and they say, well, we have nothing against foreigners. It was just this particular job. We wanted somebody from Norway with a Norwegian education. What does it tell us? They hadn't read the other applications, because then they would have seen they were identical. When I tell this to colleagues around in Europe, they say, well, that's just the way it is. This is normal. In Croatia, Croatians should have more rights than others. In Macedonia, Macedonians should have more rights than others. It's the way it is. The first 5 years of my dialogue work, I sat with potential leaders 3 months at a time. That's a long conversation. From 1995 until 2000. People from Pristina, from Belgrade, from Zagreb, from Sarajevo, Skopje, even Ljubljana. After 5 years, we had to shorten the time. It was shortened down to 1 week, 2 weeks. But all in all, 3,000 people from ex-Yugoslavia have visited Lillehammer. And although in deep conflict, they had one thing in common. They all seemed to rely on their own sources. They all seemed to believe that my sources is better than yours. My grandfather is more truthful than your grandfather. My journalists, my politicians are more truthful than yours. And they all arrived believing there is one truth, we all know it, but you deny it. Or you are the victim of nationalistic propaganda. So the first step was to create trans-ethnic dialogue spaces where people could meet. And during 3 months, people had time to discover each other's multiple identities. Maybe they never liked each other as Serbs and Albanians, but they connected. as gas lovers, table tennis players. They were both teachers, parents, kids. So upon return home, they established 10 Nansen dialogue centers and continued to create dialogue spaces. Some of these were very innocent, like in Jajce, the Nansen volleyball team, a mixed Croat-Bosniak team. People even said, reading this little manuscript, oh, don't mention that, Steinar, it's too small. No, it's easy to have a food festival. It's easy to have a music festival. Oslo looks very integrated on the surface. It's the everyday life of practice, 2-3 times a week, playing every Sunday, and the parents coming to watch the mixed team together. Those things are very important. We have an ethnically mixed Nansen street outside Pristina. We have joint Nansen classrooms in divided high schools in Stolac, Nansen libraries. But most significant were the dialogue seminars themselves, where people sat down and talked. Some people say dialogue is too womanish. It's what women do. No, it's very provocative conversations about how we see reality, how we understand history, and how we see each other. And the conclusion, if we want to improve the relationship between minority and majority, we have to put integrated schooling high on the agenda. As I've understood, this is provocative to those who support segregated schooling in order to secure education in one's own mother tongue. But in Macedonia, we saw how this contributed to increased segregation. It can actually serve the interest of the majority to support segregated minority schools if the aim is to keep them invisible. And when you come with that diploma from a segregated minority school, are you really competing on an equal level for jobs? Or do you start to dream of maybe moving elsewhere? In Macedonia, the Nansen model for integrated education was introduced already in 2008. A new educational model that focused on integration between students, teachers and parents from different ethnic communities, creating a multi-ethnic environment. But the teaching itself, the major subjects, were still in the mother tongue. In other words, integration was not assimilation. It was standing apart, recognizing the differences, but through dialogue, moving closer, becoming more visible, maybe establishing relationships, but never, never a melting pot. And as the famous anthropologist Fredrik Barth said, you become aware of who you are on the border to somebody else. Integrated schooling doesn't mean you become invisible. It means you become visible to the others. The High Commissioner on National Minorities recognized this work with the Max van der Stoel Prize in 2011, and also the Council of Europe has had study visits. Over the last 8 school years, the Nansen model has been implemented in more than 15 primary and secondary schools. Last year alone, 1,200 students, 600 parents, and 30 teachers participated in these activities. One key to the success is the focus on parents. You have to include parents along the way all the time. If they become your enemy, you won't succeed. We discovered the lack of a pedagogical infrastructure, no place to train teachers. And 3-4 years ago, we established a Nansen Training Center, and we have educated 220 teachers. They've gone through basic, advanced training, how to tackle a bilingual situation, how to tackle a multicultural classroom. And the model has spread from the Albanian, Macedonian area of Macedonia to the Macedonian, Turkish area. As of today, the Ministry of Education in Macedonia has embraced this model, and the concept paper of integrated education has been approved. It has also been introduced to schools in southern Serbia and Bosnia and Herzegovina. And this success story of good cooperation between the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Nansen office in Skopje, and the Macedonian Ministry of Education is worth looking into. I want to end by a very hopeful anecdote. This is truthful, and it turns a little bit upside down what we have been talking about. But I have to tell it. I grew up in a small suburb in the northern part of Oslo. When I went to school, we were only ethnic Norwegians. I have a granddaughter. Today she goes to the same school as I did. In that school, there is now 67 different nationalities. Veitvet. And one day I was looking at her school picture. Her class looked like a commercial for UNICEF. She could not understand my fascination. She asked me, what's so special? What's so strange? I realized this is how she has been raised. She sees this as a resource and a strength. The best student in her class comes from Kosovo. Her best friend comes from Chechnya. Her neighbor is from India. She truly experiences these differences as a strength. No, I formulated that wrong, because she looked at me with sharp eyes, and she doesn't experience this as differences. She said, "Grandpa, get it. Time has changed." That's just the way it is.